Okay, now some final thoughts about the concepts we discussed in this chapter. Of course, we discussed lots of different models. Now, to summarize them, how do we select which model to use? And there are two or three quite important considerations that you should look into. One is, you plot the data, time series plot, and see whether the series displays a trend or not. And do we expect that trend to continue in the future? Okay. If there is no trend, then a method like SES will be just fine. You don't need to include LES type of models. But if there is trend, then you should look at models that includes trend. Okay, that will be like an LES model. One more thing you should look at, another consideration, is the variations you see in the data. Okay, does that increase over time? So initially the variability is small, but over time the variabilities increase. Then you need to dampen those down, and for that transformations will be very helpful. One of the transformations, you try 2 or 3 different transformations and see which one would be the best. So if the observations tend to be more variable over time or less variable, so if the variability, the band of fluctuations is not the same over time, then you consider one of the transformations. So when there are a number of equally possible plausible methods, then you should select the one that, there are two things. One is, if it is possible, you break it down into estimation sample and holdout sample. Okay, the ones that do better with the holdout sample should be preferred. Okay, the ones that would predict the future sales, the data that was not used in estimating the model. And also, between two equally plausible models, one that is simpler is always preferable. So you don't go for complication just for the sake of it. You go for a more complex model only if there is significant improvement in performance. Now here are some principles for exploratory models, extrapolative models. So these are some steps that we have already gone over. So plot the series, time series plot, and clean the data and make sure, that means check for outliers, and if you have to make some transformations, you perform those transformations, and then required by the expectations of the process. So that's the third step. And then you select a model, simple model. If there is need for more complicated model, then you go for more complicated model. And then evaluate alternative methods, and use the out of sample or holdout data to analyze. And if it is possible, you should always try to. Now, if the sample is small, then you will not have the opportunity to use holdout sample. But if you have a large enough sample, you should always try to set aside the last few data points as holdout sample. And then you need to update the estimates frequently. We looked at one possible method for updating the parameters of smoothing constantly alpha and beta using the tracking signal approach. So that concludes chapter 3. And in chapter 4, so in this chapter we looked at basically trend models, if you have trend. But in chapter 4 we're going to look at seasonal variation. If there are seasonal variabilities, how do you adjust for that fact?